Okay, hello everybody. So I will ask you to please...
So probably someone in the control room can turn the lights on, that I will see the students.
Look. They're already not so quiet. They're feeling more comfortable. Yeah. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of the State of Israel, to SAR High School. We are tremendously grateful to you for making the time to meet with us today. I also want to take the opportunity to welcome your wife, Neely. It's a really pleasure and honor to have you here. And I want to take a moment to just express gratitude to Mr. Jack Bentheim, President of SAR, for making this possible. And yes, and to also take a moment to express our condolences. Mr. Bentheim has been trying very hard over the years for this day to arrive, and unfortunately he is in the middle of Shiv'ah right now, and so cannot be with us, and we offer him nechama on the loss of his sister. We have a few moments in the arrangement. What we're going to do here is spend hopefully 20 or so minutes of us talking together, and then hopefully students, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. And we could probably take all of that time just with the bio and the credits of Mr. Barak. I just want to put a couple of things in perspective to start. Medinat Yisrael has had 12 prime ministers. It is, if you think of that, there are 12 prime ministers in the history of Medinat Yisrael. We have the zchut of being able to host one of those prime ministers here in our school. That is tremendous. And I also want to point to just a couple of the highlights. Mr. Barak has his role in establishing leading missions in Sayeret Matkal, which is kind of the Delta Force of Medinat Yisrael from its infancy. He's the leader responsible for military intelligence in Israel for many years, Minister of Defense, of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, and of course, as many of you know, Mr. Barak shares the honor with one other of being the most decorated officer in the history of Tzahal Medinat Yisrael. It is truly, truly remarkable. There's a lot to discuss, and these are very challenging days. Today has been a challenging day on its own with the moving of the American embassy and a difficult day in Israel on the Gaza border, the Iran deal. There's a lot to talk about. I thought, though, that before moving into the current events, I wanted to start with your book. Mr. Barak and Neely are here because of the release of his new book, My Country, My Life, that was just released last Wednesday. And
that's better. You can see even the piano and the rabbi over there, everything.
I have to say that when I started reading the book, the first 200 pages, I could not put it down. And it felt important to me to start. I was totally captivated by your Sayeret Matkal experience, what the country felt like from the way that you described it and your role in it. It felt to me that the stories and the missions that you describe are nothing short of heroic, and it felt like it would be very meaningful for our students and for all of us as a community to hear a little bit about that time, the time in your life, the people with whom you worked and from whom you learned, and the kind of courage that it took to be able to do what you did in those days.
When we started Sayeret Matkal, which is exactly the equivalent of American SEAL Team 6 or Delta Forces, long before those units came into existence, was something that we didn't feel that we were doing something great. It was out of the normal army. We didn't wear uniform. We approached our officers on first name like friends in the kibbutz. And we started from zero. Then we turned into certain intelligence gathering related operations, which I don't want to dive in. And it took us several years before we looked around and thought that we are more trained and better selecting the individuals, and we can jump into special operations. So we try to promote ourselves into this arena. There were very few of them, but suddenly it turned into a major problem, basically because of terror. I remember the first operation that I led as a counter-terror operation. It was to rescue hostages on board of an hijacked Sabina 707 passenger airliner which landed in Ben Gurion. When we stormed it, it was full of over 100 passengers and explosives already deployed in some places, the hands of the terrorists. They had weapons and hand grenades, whatever. We stormed it and disguised as maintenance crew leaders in white overall, and my team was some 13 other officers and soldiers of mine. I was the commander of the unit at the time. When we stormed it, it took some 90 seconds before shooting was over. We killed 2 and captured another 2. We saved all the passengers except for 1. And we have 1 young officer slightly wounded in his hand from a shot came from one of our weapons. His name was Lieutenant Benjamin Netanyahu, the present Prime Minister. He was a young officer under my command at that time. And so we basically found ourselves after this operation. The nation was kind of elated from the success. We were described as angels in white and so on. But, you know, it was a great operation, and never again any hijacked airplane landed in Israel. But terror did not stop. So few months later, just few months later, there was the Olympic Games in Munich, and 11 of our athletes were massacred. We had at the time a tough prime minister, a lady born in Milwaukee named Golda Meir. She was probably tough because of the weather there and some of her genes. But she immediately ordered that all those who were involved, directly, indirectly, should be eliminated. And so I found myself once again, a few months later, disguised as a young woman, and with everything in place, leading a commando operation at the heart of Beirut to kill 3 of those terrorists. They lived in high-rise buildings, close to each other, bodyguards outside, and weapons inside the apartment, and deliberately chose it very close to armed police station. We came there after midnight as a group of youngsters, 3 of us girls and the other boys. And we came, and I sent the different squads into their apartments and stayed on the street level with a stocky blonde besides me. And I remember to this day, the door was open on the other side of the road, and a big bodyguard came out of the car, opened his leather jacket, pulled out a handgun, started to cross toward us. When we were about the distance to the second or the third row here, I murmured to the blonde, no choice. And I still remember the shock in his eyes when he saw the 2 young women open their jackets, pulling out submachine guns and started to shoot at him. He immediately jumped into the car. Within minutes, there come Land Rovers, one after the other, from the armed police station with 6 or 8 gendarmes on each one of them. So we found ourselves in a highly intensive shooting exchange from 20 or 25 yards. And to cut a long story short, within a few minutes, the squads came in. We took our cars and left the place. It was 7 minutes of intensive shooting at the street and inside the apartments. The 3 terrorists killed, probably 8 or 10 gendarmes, and 30 minutes after we landed on the shores of Beirut, we were back into the sea, swimming toward the small dinghies that waited us to take us back to the missile boats. So that's just an example of this kind of operation. At the time, it was mind-boggling. Since then, far from the public eyes, both Sayeret Matkal and other special units are doing operations which are even more kind of exotic, but usually they are not being exposed unless they fail. So better not to know about them, but that's one of the reasons that we are safe. We were never hesitated to take the steps which are needed to protect ourselves. We're always aware the Mid-East is nothing like the Midwest. I always used to scorn American presidents. I told them, I envy you. Asked me why. I said, we wanted so strongly to have the Canadians as our neighbors, and you got them. So it's we are acting out no choice. A person cannot choose his parents, and a nation cannot choose its neighbors. They are whoever they are. Very tough neighborhood, but that's where we were brought up, where we were born as a nation and civilization and a faith, and we are determined to flourish there in a way against all odds.
I can ask you a question on the personal front in terms of fear and failure and the courage that it took to perform those missions. Do you remember how you thought about those at the time?
At a young age, your life is more precious to you than in our age, my age. But the capacity to assess risks is much lower. So you don't really see all the risks. You see intellectually, but you don't take them seriously. You expect that it won't happen to you. And in a way, when you are a commander, you have so many other things to process during the operation that you don't have even time to fear. You have to make sure that everything happens and that inevitable developments that you did not expect will be answered quickly and decisively. So you don't have a lot of time to think of all these elements. But somehow, probably it's not a coincidence that young people are fighting. People your age, or probably 2 or 3 years older, are the core of our fighting force, and led by a very small amount of more senior officers, like in how you call Merut Shlichim, these kind of, we pass the torch from a generation to generation to protect us and make sure that we will remain on our feet, whatever happens around.
So I would like to move from the past to the events of today. Today there's a ceremony marking the move of the American Embassy to Yerushalayim. I think it's something that we've pined for a very long time. I know that you supported that move. What do you feel about the timing of that move and how it came to be? And has your thinking last week changed at all in light of what's been going on today and what might happen tomorrow, which has been a tough day? We see it as something that should have happened 70 years ago, so it's better late than never. And I believe that all Israel, from all sides of the political spectrum or the spectrum of society, we all welcome this decision. It's a courageous decision of the president. Of course, it alienates the Arabs and the Palestinians especially, but I think for no reason, based on two elements. Number one, it does not exclude an American embassy in the Palestinian capital, wherever it will be, once the Palestinians master the political courage to strike a deal with Israel, stop incitement, stop terror, and start living as relatively normal
neighbors, probably not love affair, but at least certain tolerance to each other. So that's the main element about it. Probably, okay, I leave the second element for probably other question, but it's basically it's accepted as something very natural that had not happened there earlier because of the Palestinians. In a way, I should tell you that we think that the whole conflict with the Palestinians, in a way, is read by the world in an improper way. We always hear about the Nakba Day, the disaster that happened to the Palestinians. What is the disaster? I was 6 years old when the whole story started. There was partition plan approved by the General Assembly of the UN, the highest authority on international affairs at the time, which recommended two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jewish state was almost ridiculous, very dangerous kind of map. 3 cantons, hardly connected, without Jerusalem, without even a road to Jerusalem, or corridor to Jerusalem. And Ben-Gurion, on behalf of the Zionist movement, accepted it. The Palestinians rejected it and called upon all the Arab neighbors. I remember he was 6 years old, the day after the resolution in the General Assembly, the war started. And the moment Israel announced its statehood, 5 Arab armies entered into Israel. So trying to kill the baby Israel before it can stand on its feet. And we won and survived. So we will never be apologetic. Decades later, I told Arafat in front of President Clinton, I will never be apologetic about the fact that we survived. You, President Clinton, had not yet been born. Arafat was a teenager. I was a young kid. But we both fully remember it. So don't tell us stories now. And whenever they are telling about the refugee, Israel responsible for refugee, I told Arafat in front of Clinton, we will never be morally apologetic about this issue of refugees. It's true, through this war that was imposed upon us by the other side, 650,000 Palestinians left what became Israel. But during the same 2 years and the 2 years after the war, we absorbed from the Arab world 650,000 Jews who had forced to leave, sometimes leaving all their property behind them. We never called them refugees. We called them brothers, and nowadays, majority of Israelis are the offspring of these people. So the decision to make the refugee issue eternal, something always hovering in the air as a great moral sin, is totally unbased on reality. It's efficiency of propaganda, sometimes reflecting the predisposition against Israel in certain corners of the world.
I'd say, following up on that, but bringing it to 2000, when at Camp David, you proposed, you came forward with a proposal that was as forthcoming, the most forthcoming of all, and it came to a halt. And subsequently, there was criticism as to what is the narrative, is the standard narrative that Israel came forward, the Americans supported it, and the Palestinians just said no to everything. And there were some who came and said, that's actually not the real story. It was much more complicated than that. How do you respond to those critics? And I'm asking this specifically in the context of, do you feel this kind of idea that was said that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, that type of thing? Did you experience that there as well? And how do you respond to the critics of what went down there?
There were many critics. I cannot count all of them, but there was one critic said, Barak and Clinton tried to dictate to Arafat a solution. They brought an offer and told him, take it or leave it. Not true. we came with a very generous offer, metaphorically covering 90+% of whatever he can think of, but we never asked him to take it or leave it. We told him you can have reservation from any paragraph in this offer, or from all paragraphs, but we want you to accept it as a basis for negotiation. The fact that he was never ready to take it as a basis of negotiation and chose to go into terror, which he prepared long before we gathered at Camp David, was a testimony to what was the real story. There is another complaint that probably it was not prepared well enough. What do you mean not prepared? When I came to power in 1999, it was 6 years after the Oslo agreements were signed and 3 years after the mutually agreed date to start permanent status negotiations. There were, over these 6 years, thousands of meetings all around the world with the Palestinians, with tens of thousands of pages just covering the reporting. Even during my own, probably a year before we got to Camp David, during this year, my envoys met with Arafat envoys in 4 continents, not in Antarctica, but the rest of them, in 4 continents, and having hundreds of meetings with thousands of pages of reports. And now you should understand that I spent all my life in this area. Nothing is new to me. I know every jabal and every wadi, and we know the problems. We are not learning about the conflict between the Chileans and Argentinians about the marine border, that once the Vatican called to negotiate, so say, first of all, we had to study the case for 2 years. We don't have to study, we're living there. So these are all fake news. The early version, before this term got traction in the English language, as well as other stories that I didn't meet Arafat. Under request of one of our people who was the closest one to Arafat, I went to his hut, spent there 3 hours with him and Abu Mazen, and we ate a lot of baklawas and drank a lot of tea, but he was not there. His mind was not there, and you could, unfortunately, you could feel it. So it's not easy to negotiate with this type of characters, but this whole story that something could have been different if we just behave slightly different is all just as once Clinton put it. He called me half a year after I left the Prime Minister's office. He called me, he found me swimming in Sardinia in some small bay. And the call came from the deck of the yacht. You have a phone call. I asked, who is it? The President of the United States. Say, okay, I will swim. I thought that it's a joke. But it ended up to be Clinton calling and basically saying, oh, a leading reporter in New York Times named Deborah Zontag wrote a long article with all this story about it's not the full story. And Clinton was there to tell me, look, you probably didn't read it, I understand, if you are swimming now in Sardinia. But even assume for a moment that I made 100 mistakes and you made 100 mistakes. But the end of the story is at a certain point we put a simple and far-reaching proposal on the offer on the table, and the man rejected it even as a base for negotiation and turned into terror. So this is the root and the core of the issue. The rest is just gossip.
So you're clearly a supporter of a two-state solution, and we seem to be hearing more and more questioning as to whether that moment has passed, whether it's still possible given all that has transpired since 2000, where we are now. What are your thoughts in terms of the current situation, the government now, and where you think it should head? Where would you head it if you could?
don't know where to start with it. It's not a simple issue. I think that the two-state solution is essential. It's painful but simple equation. Between River Jordan and Mediterranean, there live 13 million people. All in all, 6.5 million Israelis, 6.5 million Arabs. If there is only one political entity reigning over this whole area, it will become inevitably, that's the key word, inevitably, either non-Jewish or non-democratic. If this block of millions of Arabs with clear national aspiration can vote to the Knesset, that's a binational state overnight, and within few years, a binational state with Arab majority and permanent civil war. That's something that none of us want to see. But the only other alternative is that they cannot vote permanently. If they cannot vote permanently, that's not a democracy. I don't want to quote the name of a regime in a neighboring continent in the previous century before you were born. But that's not a democracy. And both alternatives are far from the Zionist dream. Whenever I talk to people, you know, there are especially religious people in Israel, the followers not of Rabbi Kook the father, but of Rabbi Kook the son, who believe that we have a right, which I don't question. We have the right, we have natural right, historic right, biblical right, we have right. The question is not what you have in rights. The question is what you are doing with your right. Even along the history of the two previous Jewish sovereignties, the King David dynasty with all the separation later on to Judea and Samaria, and later on the Maccabean. It's altogether 220 years and then another 80 or 180. Altogether not even 10% of the length of our history. You look at the maps, and we had Brit Ben, even then we had the divine promise, even there. But the map looked like an accordion. It goes wider or smaller according to the physical situation on the ground and the real political constraints. When you try to ignore it, you violate the most important recommendation of Talmud, drawn out from the two cases of Churban. Don't accelerate the Messiah. He will come on his own time. Don't try to push him. Don't climb in the wall. Namely, don't challenge the biggest powers of the time. And number three, avoid sinat achim, hatred between brothers. So they seem to bypass all this. When you talk to intelligent people in the Israeli political spectrum who believe in one state, and you ask them how you avoid it, they look to heaven. Basically, they cannot have an explanation, so they expect heavenly intervention. The tragedy is that if you find a way to talk to an ideologue, not a terrorist, ideologue of the Hamas in Europe, and you ask him, how comes you dare to think that you are going to destroy Israel? Israel is the most powerful player all around, 1,000 miles around Jerusalem. They are supposedly a nuclear power. What can you do? What can Hamas do to destroy Israel? He looks to heaven. And for those of you who knows a little bit about the roots of Islam, coming out of Judaism, so probably if there is someone there, it's basically the same one. It's a problem. One of the two sides is wrong. The question is probably it's us, not them. We cannot lead the sovereign state of Israel based on wishes and on hopes for divine intervention. The Almighty helps those who help themselves on the ground and using their common sense to judge realities, not wishful thinking. And the problem is that if it were serving the security of Israel, all my life I insisted, security consideration ahead and above anything else. So if this idea of one state would have really, genuinely served our security, I would say ignore any other consideration. Go for security. But that's not the case. If you bring into a room all the former Ramatkals of Israel, living ones, you cannot call upon those who are already in Yeshiva Shel Mala, all the living Ramatkals, all the living heads of Secret Service, all the living heads of commanders of the Central Command, which command the Judea and Samaria area, and so on. You have 30 people, 90% of them will tell you, however surprising it might sound when you listen to what comes from our government, they will tell you, 90% of them, gentlemen, Israeli is better protected and more safe and better deployed to fight effectively against terror if we delineate a line within the promised land, which will include all our strategic need, 80% of the settlers in the settlement blocks, and a solid Jewish majority for generations to come, and live on the other side the area, which is basically Palestinian habitated. We should control it security-wise as long as needed, but make sure that this is the place where ultimately the right time when they will be right for this, a Palestinian state might emerge. The question of the vision, even if now it cannot be translated into or fully materialized, has to do with what we are doing. Because in my system, you don't have to invest in the isolated settlements all around Judea and Samaria. You have to invest only in the settlement blocks. According to the government version, you have to continue with isolated settlement because that's the only sure way to try to close the door on any possible two-state solution. So there is a difference which happens tomorrow. Now, if you ask me whether it's impossible, nothing is impossible. Don't believe it. Nothing is impossible. Whoever studied history, look at the experience of Northern Ireland. Two communities based on religious differences, smaller probably, but tough enough to hold them for centuries, shedding their blood into each other's hands, with no solution. It is now about to be solved. Look at Bosnia and Serbia and Kosovo, the former Yugoslavia. You see something also which is hundreds of years old. No one believed it could be solved. It was solved. So I can tell you, the moment there will be responsible and daring and self-confident Palestinian leadership, and a response from our side, a solution is within reach, and I don't see anything that can block it from turning into reality. And 10 years or 20 years after it would materialize, whether it takes 5, 15, or 50 years, no one will be able to understand why it took so many victims so long to reach this kind of resolution of common sense.
Time is short, and I'd like to turn to students to be able to ask a couple of questions while we still have time. So thank you, and the floor is yours. Students?
Hi, I'm Shama. I'm a junior. Thank you so much for coming here. We keep on talking about the faults of Palestinian leadership, but I recently read
you have to speak slower and try to make it an Israeli accent, so I will catch what you're saying.
You keep on talking about the faults of Palestinian leadership, but I recently read an article that you wrote for the New York Times, I think in 2017, that focused a lot on Netanyahu's leadership and how there's faults on both sides. So can you talk about how Israel and the Israeli government should develop like a newly democratic leadership and maybe move past the corruption of the Netanyahu administration?
What was the point of the?
Move past the corruption of the Netanyahu administration.
I don't feel easy to talk here about the corruption scandals. There is a corruption scandal that surrounds Netanyahu from all direction. With some of the three closest assistants of him are now state witnesses for what happened, and it's still under discussion. The police recommended to indict him for bribery, but there are other two issues which are still there, and nothing is final until it got to formal decisions. So put it aside. We call it tachanot hatzedek, the mills of justice. They work slowly, and we have to wait. As a person who knows Netanyahu from early age, I wish him that it will end up with nothing. And basically, I know him well enough to know that he doesn't have a criminal mind. But he might, after so many years in power, lose the instinct for where the line is drawn, that until here it's done, and beyond that it's not done. That's the risk that he really faces. But my article in the New York Times dealt with other issues, with the policies of the government. And the policies that I hinted to you earlier, I criticize very strongly. As a person who spent decades in our security and was, until several years ago, Minister of Defense, I can tell you honestly that Israel, because or as a result of our achievements along the last 70 years, Israel is the strongest power, not just militarily, but also strategically, technologically, economically. We are not the biggest economy, but by far the most vibrant one. You probably know that more Israeli companies are traded at NASDAQ than out of any other country outside of North America. And if we behave properly with the administrations, even when they change, we will be strongest even diplomatically. So this Israel can have enough self-confidence and an inner calm to come to grip with reality and look for solutions, for ways to change the situation rather than to follow into this deadlock. I can tell you there is no external existential threat on Israel. Israel is stronger than any neighbor or any combination of neighbors. It doesn't mean that a war will be a picnic. We might have a lot of rockets or missiles on the heads of our population. We might have to bury people, but it's not, nothing is existential, including Iran, which is the only one with a potential of turning into existential threat in the longer term if they find a way to develop nuclear weapons. But that's not behind the corner. It's not, we are not there. The real existential threat to the Zionist project now stems out of the drift that we experience on this slippery slope towards a one-state solution. And I genuinely think that there is no more urgent and important task for Israelis now than to put a wedge on this slippery slope and stop the drift along it in order to protect our future, our identity, our security. Nothing to do with the fact that the other side is the Palestinians.
Do we have one more question?
Hi, my name is Brenna. As defense minister, you advocated for bombing the Iranian nuclear sites. Can you comment on why the Israeli government decided not to?
Translate.
There was an opportunity to bomb the Iranian nuclear site, and the decision was not to go for it at the time. Can you explain why?
Between 2009 and 2012, there were very serious considerations in the Israeli government. I was a Minister of Defense at the time. All those years, it was Bibi was Prime Minister Lieberman supported it. I was probably more hawkish on this issue than Netanyahu and Lieberman, but we were all together trying to prepare the ground. We never made a final decision, but we thought that we have to be ready, that when we have operational capabilities, international legitimacy, and compelling imperative to do it now, because if you wait, you won't be able to do it later or do it effectively enough. That might be the simplex within which a possible decision to take an action could have happened. Anyone who might read the book might find probably too short to your taste description of this, what happened in every year. We cannot unveil everything, but I may say that in the first time we came close to it, there was, according to the generals who were responsible, they were not yet ripe. Second, coming next year, we couldn't mobilize enough support among our own cabinet ministers. You have to understand that unlike the situation here, neither the Minister of Defense, not even the Prime Minister, none of us is the Commander-in-Chief. The Commander-in-Chief is the government as a collective. So you have to convince the cabinet members, which about 11 people or 12 people. We had even an inner cabinet of those people who understand security, and we tried to convince these 8 people, out of which Netanyahu, myself, and Lieberman were 3. So we need another 2 to create the feeling. It's not a formal body, the inner cabinet, but to create a feeling that people who understand security, a majority support this action. We couldn't have the other 2. And the third year, we coerced the Americans into delaying a major exercise, a common exercise where thousands of Americans would come to Israel with anti-ballistic missiles capabilities, American batteries, and deploy to exercise the case that Iran launches a missile attack on Israel. So we asked them to delay it for operational reasons and intelligence reasons. We couldn't do it at the first part of the year, and the only time which it became possible was when the Americans started to come to Israel. Now, we were in a certain clash with the administration. It was clear that the administration is against any operation that Israel might launch, and we didn't think that it's proper to coerce the Americans toward action that they explicitly do not want to participate in. I had several conversations with the American president, with Bush Jr., and later on with Obama, where I told them basically that when it comes to issues which are crucial to the future of Israel, for our security, and in the future, anyway, the future of the Jewish people, we are a sovereign. We act upon our interests and considerations. We cannot afford delegating the decision even to our best friends, which happen to be you. And we expect you to respect it. And I should admit that none of them liked what I've told him, but none questioned the fact that Israel is sovereign and has the right to act upon its interests. But at the same token, if we ask the Americans to respect our sovereignty, we owe them the same. We have to respect the American sovereignty and their right to decide if they want or do not want to enter together with us. So this is in a short version, what happened with this. Later on, the situation has changed. Now you have the deal, and now America pulled out of the deal. It creates new situation, and I believe that we had for a long time, probably with Obama, but for sure with Trump, sit down behind closed door, try to make sure that enough intelligence resources are investing in knowing what happens in Iran, define together what it means, what a breakout means what should bring back the sanctions, but what might bring back the surgical military operation, either Israeli or American, to the table. I hope it will be done in the near future.
We are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us. It has been a real gift for us. And to add on to that, I have a few things to say before we dismiss. Number one, thanks to a very kind donor. SAR High School now possesses 600 copies of Mr. Barak's book. Each of you upstairs, when you go back to class, will have an opportunity. Each one of you will receive one. I encourage you to not only pick it up, but actually read it. It is riveting.
The exam is early next year.
Yes.
So make sure
you should come back to administer it. A second is for the faculty and those we're going to be meeting in the library in a few moments. I also have a gift for you in turn. We have a drawing from the text. This is a set of Tanakh, Tfilat Mincha, which is done by our art students, where they take Svarim from Tanakh, and they've produced artistic renditions, and we wanted to give that to you as a gift from us. And two staff members from Ha'oketz. Please make sure you make your way down upon dismissal. Thank you very much. You are dismissed to class.